content inventory list. What do we already have out there? I think that a lot of times we come in as IT and we go into the departments. We just expect them to tell us everything that needs to come over. There are things that they work on with other departments that may not be unearthed. And so I prefer to do some analysis before I walk into that first session. My overarching theme is it's easier to edit than it is to create. So if you walk in with a blank whiteboard for people and you tell them to start filling stuff in, that is a much more difficult conversation for them. It also eliminates your ability to really build a trust with them that you understand their business. You're literally coming in and saying, I have no idea what you people do. Tell me what you need me to do for you. And that I find is not a great way to start a relationship with your clients when you're going into a migration. Here's what I'm seeing when I go to your SharePoint site. I'm seeing some safety manuals. I'm seeing some newsletters. I know that there is some sort of a safety observation form that's out there. Those were the 3 things I found. Does that sound about right? So I also need to know where they're accessing other information. So are they going to file shares? Are they going to OneDrive? I mean, depending on what you already have. Are they doing a lot of their business inside of email? What types of processes are you still relying on email to do, for example? You need to know who has it, wherever the library name is in the location or the file share name, so where is it? Is it on a file share, in a forms library, right? I mean, you don't have to be too prescriptive. This is a very high level thing. We're not deciding where things are going to go right now. The only thing we're deciding, if you look at that graphic in the upper right-hand corner, we're just deciding what we're going to migrate and what we're going to retire. So I say at this point, you have 2 lists because you want them to sign off on both things. You don't just want to say, oh, this is in scope. If you've ever looked at what I would call a great scope of work. A great scope of work has what's in scope, but they also have what's out of scope, just to very clearly call out what we're not planning to migrate for whatever reason. So you need to know who has it, like if it's a department or if it's a business process, you need to know where it is, and then you need to know who your contact is for that. So I'm calling it an owner, but if you just want to call it a contact, somebody who's going to help you get more information, then that's fine. And then I have here also, use this as a checklist then so that you can come back and report on it. There's no reason to do double documentation. So once you have a good current state of what you've got, you can take this content inventory list and you can literally just say the date that you migrated it. Later on, my advice is going to be that you bring everything over in secret. And then when you actually launch, you just do Delta updates. That seems to be the best way that I've seen it work from a throttling perspective. And because we don't ever really know how much time these things are going to take getting into the cloud, the date that you did that initial migration, just so that you can use it as a checklist. And then the second document that's coming out of this content inventory list is what you're retiring, things that you're retiring that you're not bringing over that are either going to stay on-prem or are going to be deleted. All you're doing right now is planning the scope of the project. What's in scope, what's out of scope. This is the workflow checklist. And here are the types of things that I want you to look for. We're still trying to identify the workflow name and the location. We still want to know the process owner. But I also want you to identify the support staff from a workflow perspective. So if they need a workflow edited, then I want to know who supports that, who does that for them. Is it the help desk? Is it an internal person? Is it a contractor? Is it a third party? So it's at this point that we start to understand the business processes that we're going to be responsible for. Again, all we're doing at this point is we're just deciding whether or not we're going to migrate it or whether or not we're going to retire it or whether or not it's still being used. So you'll find sometimes if you go look at some SharePoint lists, hey, the last time that this SharePoint list was edited was 2 years ago. To kind of come in and say, hey, we've noticed that this hasn't been edited in the last couple of years. Have you found another way to do this? So that way, all you're doing is identifying it and deciding whether or not they need you to create a new solution for them in the new environment. So the process owner and the support staff, the date the new functionality is demonstrated. I think at this point, even when you're just bringing the content to light, this is your first touch point with the client. And I hate to waste a touch point. And what I mean by wasting a touch point is I hate to not show them the new functionality. I hate to not normalize what that new environment is going to look like. And so even though it's too soon for for a proof of concept, it's not too soon for a slide deck with some screenshots. It's not too soon for some sort. I mean, you don't really have to go into a full-blown demo if you don't even have anything stood up yet, right? But something, go out to the internet, find a blog entry, do something so that you can find something to show them that just says, hey, we would still need to build this out to take a look at it, but this is kind of how it would look if we were going to put it in, let's say, a flow, or if we were going to migrate something to, let's say, a SharePoint list. So remember, I'm not just talking at this point about your workflows that are already automated. I'm talking about finding those paper forms. And so over on the right-hand side is where I've shown you a couple of the things that I like to look for. I like to look for Visio files because that's a clear indication that somebody has a process somewhere. Standards and procedures, any kind of paper forms. So literally just look up the word form and see what happens in your SharePoint search, and even in your file share search as well, right? And some of this you can put off as help desk tickets, I find as well. Make your information architecture team do some of this heavy lifting for you. Make them run the search, looking for anything you can. At this point, you're trying to get a clear handle on the current state of your environment without solely relying on your customers to tell you what that environment looks like, because the truth is they probably don't fully realize the extent of the environment. So if you bring in Microsoft to look at your environment, the first thing they're going to tell you to do is that you're going to have to upgrade Exchange. And one of the reasons that you have to get Exchange done is because they need to have a good handle on what your groups are going to be. So this is where I would love to see you guys get integrated into that team and into that discussion, because as you probably already know, so when you create an Office 365 group, if you're not an Office 365 admin, that means somebody else is doing this for you, and you need to know what to tell them to do. When you create an Office 365 group, at a minimum, you're getting more than this, but at a minimum, you are getting a SharePoint site, and then you're getting the option to create a team, or at least to show the team to everybody. And so I would hate for you to architect your team's environment and then go back and have a duplicate team, which is exactly what's going to happen. So my suggestion, based on the order that you would do things so that you would have the least possible issues, would be that you clean up Active Directory before you migrate it to Azure. And it's because it will be so much more clean for you. So for those of you who haven't started, you can still potentially influence this, but you may not be able to. It's like I said, oftentimes Exchange is a completely different team. But if you can, if we can live in a perfect world, and you're going to create a matrix, or a permissions matrix, where you say, okay, these are the people inside of this workflow, or inside of this process, or inside of this department, and you're going to name every single person out. And you're going to say that that by and large, let's say 80% of the time, they are only reading information, or most of the time they're contributing information, or most of the time we give them full control. So that's all you have to do, right? You just have to decide, are they readers, contributors, or do they have full control? Are they admins? And then my suggestion is for you to create Active Directory groups. You don't have to fix existing ones necessarily, because you can choose which ones come over, but create a naming convention, right? Like 0365. So like our naming convention was intranet, blah, blah, blah. So that we knew at any given moment in Active Directory that these were the intranet groups we were talking about. So our naming convention always started with the same word. You can start it however you like. So then I want you to create groups that are readers, contributors, and admins, because really you only get owners and members, right? And so I want you to have a group that actually distinguishes people that you only give access to read information, because with an Office 365 group, you're only going to get the one choice. Are they an owner or are they a member? And then you have to undo it, later. So from a team's perspective, obviously, you've got your members and you've got your owners, but from a SharePoint perspective, we have a different permission level. In my opinion, I think for the best results, you're going to actually have a permission matrix that has people in groups based on their access to information.